everybody. Welcome to another episode of RM Sotheby's Car Show, recorded here in Paris. We're surrounded by cars. There is a bottle of wine in front of me, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. This is actually at our Paris sale. I'm recording this in January, at the end of January, and we are under the Louvre, which is interesting and very topical actually recently because people are throwing soup around in the Louvre, aren't they, at expensive paintings? But we're not going to throw the wine around at expensive painting. But I'm joined by a car specialist, not wine specialist, Michael Squire, and I'm also joined very much by a wine specialist, and I'm going to have to say this quite slowly because we've already explained that everyone laughs at my French pronunciation. So you're Celian Ravel d'Estien.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Brilliant.
You impressed with it?
I'm really impressed. Yeah.
And Celian is the head of sales for wine in France, which obviously wine is part of. I mean, you probably had your first glass of wine at about the age of 2, didn't you? That's what happens in France?
That is pretty much maybe slightly later, but yeah. But wine is really it's part of the French culture, and it has been for forever. It's really very important. I mean, it doesn't mean every French would drink wine at the age of 2, but yes, it is a very important part of our culture. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. And the reason we're doing this, I know that this podcast is called The Car Show, and we are surrounded by cars, but we do occasionally love to bring in some specialists from Sotheby's that know an awful lot about other things other than cars. And we learn a lot, don't we? Because we don't even know a lot about cars.
No, that's why we get other people on the show to say something really interesting.
It's nice to learn something about something. But this time last year, we were with Jonny, who is the head of whiskey. And I'm not really a whiskey drinker myself, but I learnt more about whiskey in a sort of a 30-minute conversation with him than I'd learnt in the previous 50 years, and it was great. So no pressure, but you're going to have to give me a lifetime of knowledge in about 30 minutes.
Do my best.
And because just a little bit more context as well for listeners is that we are RM Sotheby's. We specifically buy and sell cars, but we are part of Sotheby's luxury division. And as people often describe Sotheby's luxury division, if you can drink it, drive it, wear it. If you can drink it, drive it, or wear it, that is the luxury division. So
I think it's a very good sum up of the luxury division.
It is. It's a perfect sum up. So that's cars, it's wine, whiskey, spirits, watches, jewellery. But this podcast is about wine. We have 3 glasses, we have a bottle, but we'll come to that in a minute. So tell us, Celian, briefly, how did you get into the world of wine? Because people often ask us in RM Sotheby's if they think we've got a really good job. They say, well, how did you get into this? And how do you acquire the knowledge? And it's going to be different for everyone, but how about you with wine?
Well, the first thing is, I think we have the same thing. People think we have the best job in the world.
Yes.
Because in the imaginary, we spend our day drinking and enjoying.
Oh, you mean you
wines.
don't?
Well, we do, but not as much as we would. Well, I mean, as you said, simply because wine's always been part of my culture as a French, bred and born in France. I actually started a professional career in banking, so nothing related to wine. But after a certain number of years, I had to do something different, and I think the passion for wine just kicked back.
So you were spending your banking bonus on wine? And then built up
something like that, yes. And then so I think I woke up one day saying I had enough of the trading floor, and I started a wine company in London, small online retail. Had that for a couple of years, then moved on, worked for a wine merchant in London, and then finally Sotheby's. So it's interesting because I've worked with the more everyday wines, then before moving on to the real fine wines. So it's I've pretty much seen a lot of different stuff, always mostly focused on French wines. But yeah, that's basically passion for wine.
Why did you get going in London and not Paris?
Well, it's just because I've started my career, started working in London 18 years ago, and I really enjoy living there, so I stayed there. And also, I mean, even if France and Italy are the countries for wine in Europe and Spain, but London and the UK is a massive market. It's been the first buyers of French wines and Bordeaux for 100 years, or a couple of 100 years now. So it's really a huge market for
The Brits
wine.
do like a drink, don't they?
And you realise that the expertise of wine collectors, private collectors in the UK is actually incredible. You have some of the top collectors of wine in Europe are English gentlemen, and they really know a lot about wine. So it does make sense. It's a very big place for wine.
Yeah, I keep hearing that British consumers spend more on wine.
Champagne,
And
in
champagne,
particular.
yeah.
Yeah, we absolutely love it.
And what do you think about English wine producers?
I'm looking at it very closely. I think it's very interesting. The quality in the last years is, gradually it's improving. They also have, every year it's climate change, but it's more, the climate is even better and better for wine. I mean, the first thing is they have a soil in England which is very similar as Champagne, because the soil goes under the channel and back up in the southeast of England. So the only thing they were lacking at the 10, 15 years ago was the climate. It was a bit too cold. Now it's becoming better, and they're doing amazing work. So yeah, I mean, the English wines have a bright future.
Yeah. There's a vineyard. I sort of live south of London. There's a vineyard called Denbies not far from me, which I think produces some pretty good wine.
And it's not just England. I mean, we've seen in the last decades new vineyards in new countries, either Eastern Europe, where it was back in the ancient times they did wine, but they've kind of stopped and they're doing it again, and they are doing amazing stuff. So it's not just about France, Italy, or now California. There are a lot of new wine regions in the world that will become important, and already are.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And of course, I suppose, yes, going back to the soil in the southeast corner of England, I don't know how, you probably have to go back about 3 million years, but England was obviously attached.
Yeah,
was attached to France.
That's exactly how it came.
Yes, and we are getting longer, warmer summers. So we're going to usurp France, aren't we, as the leading wine producer on the planet.
You're a brave man to say that sat in Paris.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to attract horrible looks from everyone around me.
I think it'll take a while longer. Yeah.
So what's okay, Michael? Look, you, by your own admission, you don't know anything about wine.
I know nothing.
But you do have a wife that knows something.
Yeah, I'm married to a
so-
fine wine merchant.
So
yeah.
this podcast is your opportunity to prove to your wife that you've at least listened to some of what she's had to say.
I listen to everything she says. That's on the record.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
She's taught me everything I know.
Well, just before we started recording, there was quite a valid little conversation that we had amongst ourselves, and that was, so Michael had said that somebody he knew said the great thing about wine is you can sort of go to the supermarket, buy a whole load of £7 bottles of wine and stick them in the cellar, keep them for 30 years, and they're all going to go up in value. Brilliant. Can't lose.
Just complete rubbish. Yeah.
Which, yes. And the analogy was that, and I think you very astutely observed, that if you were to buy a Renault Clio today and were to keep it 20 years, the chances are it's probably not gone up in value. I'm not picking on Renault Clios, that's kind of true of...
Well, we're in Paris, so
Like,
we had to pick
well,
one.
let's talk
Make it a
about
Twingo.
Let's talk
It's
about
fine.
it. Yeah, Twingo,
Yeah.
Citroen C3, whatever.
Yeah.
Very true, and there's a whole podcast in why some cars go up in value and some cars don't, and what makes certain cars desirable and some cars not, and so many factors involved in that. So can you just explain a little bit about, let's just say, a €10 bottle of wine that you could go into a supermarket and buy today, why the likelihood is that that's not going to be an appreciating asset? I know wine is for drinking, but if we just sort of begin to look at it from an investment point of view, how you begin to identify the wines that are going to be a good asset and the wines that won't?
Well, I think there's two things we need to look at. Is first, what's the aging potential? And then second, what's the rarity, the volume? What makes, and I think it's probably same for cars and everything, what makes it desirable or collectible, it's probably the rarity and the quality. So we're looking at those two aspects. When you talk about a £7 bottle, there's no rarity. There's probably lots of volume. So why would it go up in price if there is volume? The second
It becomes rarer as you drink it, though, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't really measure that.
You can't really measure it. The other thing, and that's probably the most important part, is it's outside of the quality. It's also subjective, because if it's a good quality wine for £7, brilliant. But will it age well? Because wine is a living product, and that's very important. Is the wine when it's bottled, it will evolve, either in a good way or in a bad way. So, and then it's all down to the grapes they use, but how the winemaker would make the wine. Do they make it to age? Do they make it to drink young? If it's a wine that's been made to drink young, which is mostly the case for everyday wine, it's not going to improve. Once it's bottled, you drink it within a year. It's not going to. If you keep it in your cellar, even in the perfect conditions, the wine inside, it's not going to improve, because it's not made to improve. So if it's not going to improve, that at some point it's going to decrease the quality, the taste. It's going to lose it. So that's why keeping a £10 or £7 bottle for 10 years, it's unlikely to improve, because it's not made to age. It's made to drink now. So I think that's the most important part.
How do you blend a wine? Is that the right word? Blend. But how do you create a wine that once it's bottled is going to improve? There must be a lot of science there. Right?
It's very technical, and I'm not a winemaker, so
no, sure.
That's the area maybe where my expertise is not. The same as a winemaker. He would tell you exactly what they do, how they do it, but it's a lot of different factors, which is basically the quality of the grapes you use, the type of grapes. Some grapes make wine that will age. Some grapes would make wine that won't. So there's a lot, but it's very, very specific to each region, each soil, each grapes, and the blend of all these factors. That's how you make a wine that can age. Also, there is, once the grape is harvested, how the winemaker technique, what would they do? Would they age in stainless tank or a wooden barrel? It will also give various sorts of properties to the wine that will make it good potential for age or not. So it's very difficult. It's not hard rule on this one can age, this one can't. You can try. I mean, I've had non-vintage champagne, which are supposed to be, you're supposed to drink them very quickly, where vintage champagne, they age well. But I had a few times where I drank some non-vintage, very regular champagne after 5-6 years, and they actually improve. So there's no hard rule. It doesn't mean it won't, but yeah, it's how it is. And then obviously the other fact is the rarity, how much has been produced, because for a Grand Cru in Burgundy or a first growth in Bordeaux, if they have small production, then obviously everyone wants some, so you need to get an allocation. You don't have one, you need to buy it. That's where the price would go up. So it's the aging potential and the rarity, that two of the factors that would make a wine increase in value, a good investment wine. That said, as a wine specialist and as a wine lover, I think about wine as it's made. You have to drink it at some point.
Yeah, of course.
It's kind of a shame to have bottles in your cellar that you look at but you never open. I understand it, but it's made to be enjoyed.
How often do we talk about that in terms of cars? We did an episode of this podcast recently where we were talking about the things that really annoy us about the car market, and that's become the obsession, particularly on more modern sort of supercars, Ferraris made in the last 20 years or whatever. Nobody drives them because everyone's so uptight about putting more miles on the car. So many cars now, they're bought, they go into climate, dehumidified storage, and people aren't enjoying them. They're not, they're cars. They have wheels and an engine. They're here to be driven.
If you were looking for a connection between cars and wines, I think that's a very interesting one, because we see the same thing in wine. People would buy them, but then just keep them in a cellar in a perfect condition. It's trophy wines. Look at them, and it's great. I mean, if you have such a vast collection, why not? But ultimately, it's a product that is made. Every winemaker would tell you they make wines so whoever buys them can enjoy them. And in the same way, I assume, a car is made to be on the road, not in a garage.
Well, and the classic question in the car world is, tell me the car I should buy that will be a good investment. And the instant answer is, well, buy a car that you like, number one. I mean, don't buy a car you don't like because you think it might go up in value. So I suppose the same is true of...
it's the same. I mean, I think that maybe where it's slightly easier in wine is you can more easily buy 2 cases and drink one and keep one as an investment. Why not? I mean, that's probably a lot of people would do that. It's maybe slightly more difficult because you wouldn't buy 2 similar cars, keep one in your garage and drive the other one.
Well, Michael probably does.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important to enjoy it.
And one of the things I find amazing about wine collecting and investing is that, you know, we put on an auction where we have 80 cars turn up and they're all here and they get traded, and these cars have come from all over Europe. And with trading wine, there'll be cases that'll sit in a storage and they've got a barcode on them, and that case may sit in exactly the same spot but be owned by 5 different people over a 10-year period. It sits in the same spot and it goes, you don't tend to get that in cars. The cars tend to sort of
we see that
move around.
Absolutely,
whereas,
not that much in France, but it's more common in the UK and in the US and Asia, where wines are stored professionally. They have this. The UK inbound warehouse for wine is massive. It's multi-billion of wine, which are sitting in professional warehouses, which is great because it's the best way to keep them in good conditions. But it's now you can sell the same case of wine could have been sold 3-4 times without moving physically from the storage. It's a good way of guaranteeing that the storage has been good. Moving wine, it's not ideal. We do move it. We're always extremely careful when we move one from a cellar and then move it to our warehouse before selling it, for example. But it's extremely important to do it in the right conditions. So it's true that the cases when they stay in the same warehouse all their life, and it's good.
And one of the most successful ones is an old mine, isn't it?
Yes, that's where we store wine.
Because all the temperature, because it's all underground, the temperature stays a constant.
Underground is the perfect place. Now there's also a question, the temperature is important, but also the humidity. It has to be a good humidity level, but not when it's too much. It's actually not bad.
So do you want a slightly damp environment?
Yes,
you don't want it too dry.
It's important. The problem is when it's damp, it's not for the wine. It's good for the wine, but it's not great for the labels, the cartons. Today we pack wines in carton. They are all recyclable and everything, which is great. But also, the carton doesn't have the same life as the wine. So after a couple of years, the wine's perfect, but cartons are starting to be very damp. But in the end, the carton doesn't matter. It's really the wine that's important, so it's good. Underground. I was in Champagne this weekend, and we visited a few Champagne houses, and they have the most amazing underground cellars. I think under Epernay, it's like 3 or I don't know how many times the size of the town in underground corridors and cellars.
Wow.
It's absolutely impressive, and obviously conditions are perfect because it's so deep underground, like up to 25 meters. It's perfect. But that's to go back to what you were saying. There are some very nice storage in the UK, deep underground, all mines. You can use different places, but if it's underground, it's always perfect. Well, close to perfect.
Provenance matters. Because provenance matters a huge amount to cars. But you can restore a car.
Yeah.
You can't restore a wine.
Well,
and I know sometimes they can. A vineyard can top up a bottle, depending on.
You usually don't touch the wine. What happens sometimes for very old bottles where the chateau would recondition them?
They put on new labels, would they?
That's something they could do. New labels. They could recork them. They could sometimes. They could slightly top it up.
Would that affect the value though? How much of the value of a bottle is in the packaging and the label?
I'd say in terms of value, if the wine's if it's like a 80 or 100 year old wine, like for example some Sauternes, which lasts very long, but the labels, the corks, the capsules, they don't last as long as the wine. If it's been reconditioned by the chateau, yes, that would add some value as well, because
Okay.
the liquid is original and all, but also the label is looking good, but it has to be reconditioned by the chateau. Otherwise, I mean, if someone tempers it and recondition themselves, that on the other end the
killer.
value is none.
So can you actually then, on a 100-year bottle of wine, you can remove the cork and recork it without doing damage to the wine? It's okay?
No, I mean only the chateau would do it for their own wines. No,
Right,
never.
right,
No, it's
right.
well, first, when you have a 100-year-old wine, it's you have to be very careful when removing the cork, because
Of course, yeah.
it very, very quickly can crumble into small pieces. But it's not. No, it's really. I mean, you wouldn't. And I think the same way with car. You don't change. If you change parts in the car, I assume that unless it's been done by the manufacturer, it's not going to add some value, is it? Or could it?
Well,
It does, yeah. So you've got programs like Ferrari Classiche, where you can essentially send a car back to them and they will restore it.
But they will be done by Ferrari.
By
the
Ferrari,
manufacturers.
yeah, and they can if there's say the car's had a bit of a life and it actually needs to be restamped, and Ferrari say this is the car, and they approve that yes, actually we're happy to restamp the chassis number, and that's fine. If someone else did that, that's a problem.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
Unless it's been done by the producer, the chateau, and they do it sometimes. It's rare, but it's a good thing. And a lot of bottles, when you have a wax capsule, a long time they can crack and be damaged. And again, the only way, either the producer could do it, otherwise, if it's been done by anyone else, you lose the value. It's very important.
And what's the situation with screw caps? Without wanting to sort of, bring the tone of the conversation down too much, because they're now essentially omnipresent, and would a very high-end wine producer that's producing something that you would potentially lay down for 50 years, would you even could they consider a screw cap, or would that?
That's an ongoing question and debate.
Right.
We don't see that that often. And again, I'm not going to go into technical reason why we use the regular corks rather than screw caps but there is, within the cork, you have a micro oxygenation. There's a very tiny bit. It's important what you don't have with a screw cap. My personal opinion is that screw cap are great for wines, the ones that are not made to age, but I don't mind,
Yeah.
But there's this part where for aging in a long period, I think, and again, I'm not a technician, I think regular corks are still the good option.
You want something that is ever so slightly porous in a minute, in a sort of a microscopic
from what I
way.
understand, yes, that's the point.
Okay.
And also, that sounds weird, but when you have a screw cap, I would personally miss the action of opening a bottle, the sound it makes when you pop the cork out. Smelling the cork, just the wine. It's part of the ritual of opening a bottle of wine. And when you have very, very high value wines, I like that side. It's important. It's part of the whole experience. And you would miss it. I would miss it.
And how common is it to have perhaps spent a large sum of money on an old bottle from a great vineyard, and for you to open it and really it hasn't kept well and you're very disappointed with the contents? I mean, that's clearly a risk.
Absolutely, always.
But I mean, is it something that would commonly be encountered?
There's two things when you look at mature wines. It's it could either be you could be disappointed because you don't like it, it's too old, it's not to your taste, but that's very subjective, and someone else would love it. It's all individual taste. Now, and the other part is the default. If there is an actual default on the wine, it could be corks. There's various others things that could impact it. Yes, I think it happens, and there's not much we can do, especially for old wines. I would assume, I know if I buy an old bottle of wine, there is a chance it's not going to be that good because it's too old. I'm frustrated if it's faulty, but the age and what I think you were more referring of, being too old and past and not maybe tasting a bit more like a port than a wine because it's aged. It's part of the game, I guess, and you have to take that into consideration when you buy. Now, what we can do, our job is we do everything we can to ensure that the bottle's been kept in the best possible conditions, because that would help avoiding these type of issues. We look at the color, we look at the levels, but we can't taste them. We can't taste every bottle we put in auction. Because then when you open it, it's done. There is that part of a risk. But I think a lot of people collectors who would buy old wines, they know it and they accept it. It's part of the game.
Yeah.
Oh, we have somebody. Did you?
I don't have a microphone.
Oh.
I haven't had any wine either.
Did you
Neither
smell?
have we.
Did you smell that from the outside?
Have a seat, please.
It always feels to me like red is really the connoisseur's choice, and that white is to some degree the poorer relation. I used to only drink red, and a few years ago I kind of migrated over to white, and I quite rarely drink red now.
Well, that was after you had all your teeth whitened and you didn't want to.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
You gave up coffee as well, didn't you?
And chewing tobacco.
You only drink rosé.
Oh, I love rosé.
Yeah, you're only ever like a foot away from a bottle of Whispering Angel.
Well, if I can't buy rosé, I just a slosh of red and a slosh of white, and essentially you've done
you get
the
the
same
colour
thing. Right. I'm coming across very badly in this podcast. No, just on that.
I think that maybe the only reason why that would be, you would think about that, is because the great red wines have a probably longer life potential, aging potential. I mean, if we take out sweet wines,
like
these are
Chateau Cam.
Chateau Cam, you will open a 100-year-old bottle, it would still be stunning when it's rarer with a red wine. White wines do have kind of usually a shorter lifetime, but some great white Burgundy would age brilliantly for 20, 30 years without any problem. It's it's also in the end it's down to everyone taste. I think that's the key point every time I talk about wine is, what do you like? If you tell me I only love white and I want to have white with my big piece of beef, sure, why not? I mean, if you like it.
I mean, but coming onto that sort of more generic topic, where does champagne plug into this in terms of collecting? Because I mean, champagne my experience
is becoming more and more collectible vintage champagne. So in champagne you have the.
And what are the parameters for collecting champagne? Because I guess it doesn't age as well as.
I think the collectibles ones are the vintage one, because they age for a very long time. Well, first of all, a vintage champagne would have stayed in the bottle, in the producer's cellar for something between 5 to 20 years before they actually release it on the market. So that shows you the aging potential. Vintage champagne has a very big potential to it. It will change. If you open a 40-year-old vintage champagne, you won't have the same bubbles that you have in a brut non-vintage, obviously, because then a long time the bubbles will reduce, and you might have it in the end almost is kind of a white wine.
Well, I'm curious about that, because I read as well. In reading this book, Billionaire's Vinegar, something I wasn't aware of is ullage, and you get this sort of air leaking in, and that's how you tell a good bottle of wine, is what the gap is, I guess. At least it's one of the parameters.
It's natural.
Natural ullage or
it's
loss of
natural
wine.
that along the time, then the level would go slightly lower.
But with champagne, presumably you can't recork it, which you can with other wines.
We discussed that earlier. You don't really recork. I mean, unless it's a very unique bottle of Yquem that Yquem themselves would recondition. Otherwise, you don't. I mean, if you tamper with it, you lose the value. I mean, if you want to do it at home and recork a bottle, it's your decision, but you lose the value. Also, the problem is when you open the cork, the oxygen is coming inside, and you don't want that.
But they do it at the vineyard, don't they? Because at the chateau, because it's a bit like going back to the manufacturer for a restoration, I suppose.
It's a bit like that. But in terms of champagne, vintage champagne are definitely great collectibles from vintage champagne from the best houses and producers are incredible. They can age for a very long time. which is not something we would imagine. But yes, they do age incredibly well. And there's a lot of story about some champagne houses and producers they've rediscovered some very old vintage champagne or very old champagne that was hidden in the cellar behind a wall built during the war, or there's always a lot of reasons, and they taste different. The same way a Bordeaux would taste different. The same, if you drink it after 10 years or after 50 years, it doesn't taste the same, but it's still amazing. And as I said, I was this weekend in Champagne, and we were visiting the Maison Perrier-Jouet, and they have what apparently, the oldest bottle of champagne in Champagne that known, which was I think in 1825 vintage. So I'm not sure whenever they're going to open it, but it's quite incredible.
Pre-Napoleon.
I don't know if you've discussed it because I only came for the opening of the bottle, but the capital gains tax. I mean, have you discussed that? I think one of the things that's similar with wine and cars, at least in the UK, it's considered by the taxman as a wasting asset because there's a cost to own the wine.
Do not draw this to the attention of HMRC, Peter.
Well-known listeners of this podcast.
They listen to everything.
But I mean, a car, there's a cost, and as long as you're not dealing in cars and you sell it, it's free of capital gains tax in the UK. I think there's a limit how many cars you can sell or buy in a year, but obviously there is a cost to ownership and storage and maintenance, and I guess it's similar with wine.
It's absolutely. I mean, different countries would have different views and different rules on that, but in some countries they consider it as it has a lifetime, and at some point it's not becoming, it's going to waste. So yes, there's no. If you can sell it, but where are they going to start looking at if you trade very actively, if you make a big revenue of buying wine, selling them within a few years, that's where they start looking at differently. But if you have a very large collection of wine, and one day you decide to sell it for various reasons, because you need the cash, because you don't drink anymore, whatever reason, yes, that's.
It's an attraction as a collector and investor, I imagine.
But I can't say how long this is. If they might change the rule one day, probably. I don't know.
And there are indices as well, aren't there, for wine collecting?
There are a few. I mean, the most famous one is the LiveX, which is basically it's a platform that would get all live prices from merchants everywhere, and try to give first the pricing on the wines, and then they create all sorts of indices like the top 100, the Bordeaux, the Burgundy. That gives a very good. It really gives a very good idea of how the market is doing. If it's going up, down, where is it at the moment? I mean, we've seen 2023 has been a difficult year. Also because the wine has been very resilient during the COVID period. The wine market was the price still going up. The last 5 years we've seen increases in price pretty much on all type of wines. Now 2023 has been a bit more complex. Overall, the price and the indices are down clearly. I think the top Burgundy are the ones which are struggling the most. But they also have been the one that have increased the most in the last 5 years. So it's just a natural readjustment. Bordeaux are doing better comparatively to Burgundy. Champagne's been again growing very fast. So now it's slowing a little bit. But and that's where these indices are very useful.
Is there? We talk quite a lot in the car market about the market evolves because fashions change and tastes change. And with the passing of generations of collectors, they're interested in different things. So the cars that might have interested my father are probably to a 30-year-old today, it's very different. And so, the market is changing the whole time. Is there any sense of that's within the wine market?
Absolutely.
As well?
I think it's like every other market. You have, your trend. You have to trends. Something are fashionable. Something is not in 10 years. It wasn't. So we do see it. And I think in the same way, you have the safe. I would say the safe bets, the ones that are and have always been and will always be the top wines. In the same way as some manufacturers are, in cars, they are the top ones, and everyone wants them. And they're quite steady. In wine, you'll have either producers or regions, that some regions where 20 years ago no one was considered them as great wine region, now they are. Yeah, it does change, and you know, these days we see a lot of interest, maybe not in terms of collectible, but in terms of trends, you know, into natural wines. It was organic wines, now it's natural wines. There's new trends, it changes. Is it going to last? I don't know, maybe.
I find it really interesting with Barolo, because Barolo is,
Yeah.
you know, was, I mean, it still is one of the great wines, but it was, you know, you used to, when it was made traditionally, like, you know, decades ago, you wouldn't open one of those bottles for, you know, until it was at least 5-10 years old. And Barolo was very much at the top, and now it's not so much.
It's still very much.
It's still,
so when you look at Italian wines, yeah, I mean, the Piedmont and Barolo in particular are among the best wines in Italy.
They're amazing.
You know, sought after wines, with the Tuscan wines as well. That hasn't really changed.
Am I right in saying no Italian wines are included in the indices for collectors?
Of course
or
they are.
They are.
Sassicaia
Well, no, because I remember
that's
talking
in
to a
there.
wine investment fund a few years ago, and they said they only exclusively deal with French wines because of their appellation.
I mean, it
contrôlée.
depends. I mean, that has changed because
This was 10 years ago.
We do see Italian wines in all our auctions. You know, all the top producers. Yeah, it has become. I mean, it's as you know, any other wines in France or, you know, Bordeaux. It's maybe less. They're not as many, you know, collectible wines, if you could say that. But yes, no, it's very much important. And I mean, Livex, what they do with their indices, they have a global one, then they have regional ones. So you will have one for Italy, for Tuscany. Yeah, absolutely, they are among.
No,
they
it was a
are
conversation I
collectibles
had
wines.
many years ago with an investment fund who.
But it has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the wine scene changes in 10 years, in 5 years. There's a lot of new.
And how
interest.
much impact, sort of into the future, will the new world wines, you know, Australia, New Zealand, South America, is their place in the kind of hierarchy of wine? Is that like that's just going to get stronger and stronger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why not. I mean, it's, you know, we've seen it in the last 20 years. You know, they've been more and more popular in the entry-level markets, but also in the collectible wines. Yeah, you have the fine. You know, when we talk about fine wines, there are some in Australia, in California, you know, South Africa, everywhere.
It's interesting you talk about fashion and trends. I mean, apart from mentioning your waistcoat, which I really think you should hide.
Well, that's just keeping warm.
But there's maybe a little bit of a parallel there with whiskey. I mean, with Japanese whiskies, who would have thought, you know, 30, 40 years ago that Japanese whiskey would have the value it does today. So I guess people open their mind, and probably things like social media as well open people's minds to new spaces within collectibles.
I would say it starts with the quality of the wine.
Sure.
As you know, if you wherever you do it, if you produce a top quality wine, there's no reason why.
Yeah,
I mean,
I wouldn't say that's necessarily a parallel with the car world, though, because brand trumps quality.
Probably,
I mean, you can look at cars around here, and we're surrounded by Ferraris and Porsches, and Ferrari and Porsche as a brand are at the very top of collectability
but
today,
if they start
I'd say. But if you go, there are some less known brands, and I'd say in the car world, brands that don't exist anymore today are less likely to reach the sort of higher echelons of collecting because they've been dead for 30, 40 years, and people today aren't hearing about them in the sort of modern context.
It would take a longer time to bring them back, and in the same way. But yeah, of course, you need to have the conjunction of a great wine, and if you happen to do it in a very well-known region, it does help, and it will get much faster. Of course, it's much faster for, you know, a Burgundy producer to become very much collectible because they are in Burgundy, and it's easier than someone.
Chateau Le Pin would have.
Yeah,
wouldn't have had that.
Well,
rise
that's an example, but they are very a lot of reason. But new regions as well will have their fine wines because they do work a lot on the quality. And if they do it, there's no reason why. Because people are also very interested in discovering new region, you know, and especially, for example, right now, when you've seen the price of the Burgundy Grand Cru in the last 5 years, it's becoming quite crazy. And then a lot of people are starting to say, well, I don't want to pay that much anymore. So I'm going to look at either another producer in the same region that does great stuff, or, you know, another region that would do maybe something a different way. It won't taste the same, of course, but the pleasure of drinking it will be there. So it's not completely locked. You can.
I suppose going back to what you were just saying. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? So Bugatti, historically, one of the most prestigious motor manufacturers in the world, pre-war. If Bugatti today hadn't come back,
yeah, it had a dead patch, really, didn't it?
Well, it did have a dead patch, and if post the 90s, if Veyrons and Chirons had never been made, if Volkswagen didn't own the brand and everything else, it would be interesting to know how that would impact the Bugatti, the pre-war Bugatti.
Is probably a little bit immune from that, but the sort of EB110s in that era was probably a little bit on the cusp of...
I think the pre-war cars will be immune to that for a period of time. There will be a lot of people that will have an interest in a pre-war Bugatti because of the way in which the brand is still omnipresent with the modern supercars. I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that affects the car market today is materials for restoration, finding the right skills. The chemicals involved in some of the old painting techniques and all these things. They're quite hard to use today, much harder than they were traditionally, and that's one of the things that affects this market. Something that piqued my curiosity, and it's not a subject I go deep into, is global warming. And I was watching a program with Joanna Lumley, who's in the Seychelles, and she was with the ladies who plant the seaweed, and they use the seaweed in the cosmetics industry. And she said, increasingly, these ladies, this is their living, are having to go deeper and deeper, sort of up to their neck, to plant the seaweed because the sea temperature is cooler there. Whereas, they could do it in a metre of water, they're now doing it in 1.5 metres of water. Many of them can't swim. It just piqued my curiosity about how global warming is affecting, maybe in a positive way, maybe some of the regions
we've already discussed.
Oh, sorry. Well,
No. He turned up on time.
I was just saying how warmer English summers are clearly going to make English wine the preeminent wine, globally.
It has an impact, absolutely, and it's the one.
Warmer English summers. Which part of which summer were you talking to? 78
in Sussex.
in Sussex, sure.
If you're north of the M25,
no, you have to go out. You have to go out of the pub to test the temperature. If you're sitting by the fire in the pub with a pint and your dog, or
north of the M25, you don't
your tractor
get the same
tied
climate.
up outside.
Now, Celian, you have bought a bottle of wine, which I did. As I said just a moment ago, I urged you to pull the cork, and in order to open this bottle, he's going to have to take some of it back to the office to share with colleagues. So we can't drink it all.
Oh, really?
Well, we'll see.
Well, it's 1:45.
I'm going to point. There we are.
It's already late.
Just pointing it at the camera for those. The trouble is with wine tasting on a podcast, we haven't invented.
Last time you held something on a podcast, it was Blue Diamonds, and you dropped them all over the floor. So I think you should be careful with that bottle.
There are some people listening to this podcast who don't even have the benefit of watching it. I am holding a bottle of red wine. So, Celian, can you tell us a little bit about this bottle?
Absolutely. This is a red Burgundy. It's a Beaune wine, and more specifically made by the Hospice de Beaune, and that is the reason I brought this one, because it's very, very, very dear to Sotheby's. The Hospice de Beaune has a very unusual story of being a public hospital in the city of Beaune, which is one of the main cities in the Burgundy wine region. And the hospice were created back in the mid 15th century. So it has a very long history. I'll try to do it short, but what happened is along the years, the hospice got donations from the locals of land and small plots of vines, and that they still get some donations. But along the years, they've now have 60-hectare vineyards around in Burgundy, which is quite big for a single producer, because Burgundy is very small, like some are just the size of a garden. So what they do with these vineyards, they cultivate it, they work in it all year long. They harvest like everyone else, end of August, start of September, then they make the wine, and then for a couple of weeks it stays with them in barrels. But the difference is that they sell it immediately. They don't wait to bottle it a couple of years later and sell it. So what they do, and it's a massive tradition, and it's part of the history of Beaune, is the third Sunday of November, they sell the entire production at auction by barrel.
Well,
So it's unique. I don't think anyone else would do that in the world. And it makes it's the biggest and the oldest wine charity auction in the world.
well,
And in Sotheby's, I mean,
Sotheby's
we're very
run
proud.
the auction.
We are very proud of being the partner with that. So we run all the auction part
Really
of it.
cool.
So yeah, it's a very unusual way of doing it, because everyone else in the wine world would see the production of the wine till the last moment where it would be bottled and then sold. But what they do is, and also because it's, traditionally they're a hospital, so it's not their job to make wine and sell wine. So that's why they do this. So they sell the whole production. It's difficult because you have to buy a barrel. You can't buy a bottle, and a barrel is about 288 bottles. So it's quite an investment.
He drinks from the barrel anyway. Wouldn't he put it in a bottle?
well, I was thinking you're probably relating this to Beaujolais Nouveau Day, aren't you? It's,
Well, it has
running around in the PR industry.
It's slightly different in terms of Beaujolais.
Before your
Nouveau.
teeth are whitened.
They do sell it in November of the year, but they bottle it, and they consider it as finished. Where when you buy it, it's not finished. Then you buy the barrel, and then it has to stay in Burgundy for another year or 2 years, depending on the wine. And you choose one of the what we call the négociant éleveur in Burgundy, who would look after your barrel and finish the élevage for it, and then bottle it for you. So you buy it; it's an unfinished product.
But there's an investment there in pleasure in the process, in terms of taking a bottle and watching the evolution of it. It must
The
be
only
quite
investment
nice.
is personal, because there's
but
no
in the
market.
pleasure.
There's no secondary market for it. I mean, they all label the same way. The only difference we have, and I'll show it for when you are lucky to see us, but this is the classic Hospice de Beaune label. You'll have the vintage, you'll have Hospice de Beaune, the appellation Beaune Premier Cru, which is Beaune Premier Cru would be the same as any other producer would do, but then they have a name of a cuvée. This one is the cuvée Dame Hospitalière. They traditionally name the cuvée by whoever has given the land that made the wine. This one, they named it in honor of the Dame Hospitalière, which are the nurses that were working at the hospice. And then you'll have your name as a buyer. That's the part that you kind of choose. You can put your own name in it, so either your company name or your name if you buy it for yourself, and then the name of the négociant éleveur who's done the élevage for you. These are specific because they are done by the Hospice de Beaune, so there's no buyer. But yeah, it's a very specific one, and you don't see those labels in retail or restaurant, or rarely, because most people who buy them, they would just buy them and keep them for themselves and drink them.
Right.
So there's no secondary market for them, and that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
And is it a fairly sort of consistent production there?
Well, production is the size of the vineyards are the same every year, but the production is very different because it depends on the climate
season,
and everything. So 2021 was a very small crop everywhere in Burgundy, and the total production was about 300 plus barrels. 2022, which was an amazing year in terms of volume and quality, the sale was 800 barrels, 820.
Wow.
So it really could
Huge difference.
Yeah, because huge difference. And last year, 2023, we had 750 barrels of wine, because they do a few barrels of eau de vie as well. So yeah, it depends. It really changes every year.
And can we ask what sort of range these barrels sell for?
In terms of the last auction in 2023, barrels went, I'd say, from 7,000 euros hammer up to 300.
What's that a bottle?
That goes from 50
Up to 300,000.
Yeah, that goes from 50 a bottle to a couple of thousand a bottle.
Yeah.
But they are, the wines are very different. You have reds and whites. It goes from, you have a Savigny-les-Beaunes or a Beaune Premier Cru, and then the Grand Cru. I think if I remember correctly, the most expensive ones were the Bâtard Montrachet, which are white. Going back to what you said about red being more collectible than white, in that case, probably not. Bâtard Montrachet, they have an amazing plot of Chardonnay in the Bâtard Montrachet appellation, and the Hospice does that amazing white Grand Cru.
Well, as we've been talking for quite a long time, Celian,
well, we have to.
You're going to have to. You're going to have
now.
to. You've pulled the cork now. I mean, we can't send it back and have another cork.
No, it would be a real shame.
Well,
So this is a 2017. So they are the wines that that we're very lucky to have for our client dinners, promotions. They're absolutely amazing to drink now. So they don't have to age necessarily for a very long time. It all depends on the wine and the appellation and everything. There are some wines that I have. In the last edition, we had last auction. We have some clients who bought some 2021, and they've received it bottled. And one said, "Well, I've just opened my first bottle of my 2021, and it was brilliant, and it's great to drink now." And he says, "I also have different barrels, some other cuvées, some other appellations, some maybe Pommard, Premier Cru." Would say, "Well, this one I'm going to keep them for another 10 years." So also there's all type of range of wines in terms of aging potential. If you want something to drink quick in the next couple of years once they bottle, you have to choose, and there are some, but there are some wines that are made that you can keep for 10, 20 years and even more. So it's pretty, there's a bit for everyone, and that's it. That is absolutely great.
So what are we looking for here? For the benefit of our viewers, not so much the listeners, sadly.
I'd say my first answer would be just pleasure. You just want to enjoy it, and I hope you're going to like it. I mean, it's a very typical. It's Pinot Noir, so the color. It's not too dark. It is really in the middle. And then in terms of everyone could smell and taste various different things in terms of aromas. So I think there's not real point of telling you what you should taste.
There's no Castellar in there.
I've got a fly in mine.
But I think what's important when tasting a wine, the one thing is the balance. It has to be balanced, between the fruit, the tannins, the acidity, all these things. How do you judge how balanced it is? I'd say just if you enjoy it.
I just had a sip. I couldn't wait. It's getting on in the day.
But if you get a good balance, then you get a good acidity, which you will feel in the back of your mouth at the end.
Yeah.
And then the final thing that you're looking at is something that will stay, and that makes it very enjoyable. If you can, after a few seconds,
It's got a lovely finish.
You can still get a taste.
Yeah.
Do you think the listeners are enjoying it?
They're having a great time.
The silence
They're really
yes, probably.
They're sitting at home thinking, they're driving to work listening to this thinking, what the hell is
It is
going
very
on
difficult to enjoy your wine when you just listen to how it's supposed to taste.
It sounds fantastic though, doesn't it?
Rescued the fly.
Well, we actually didn't say cheers. So.
Yeah, cheers. Cheers.
Cheers. Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me today.
Us.
Cheers. Thanks, Celian.
Cheers, Michael.
Always nice to talk about wine.
Finish. Goes very well after my strawberry yogurt this morning.
Well, what we're lucky is it's traditionally we say that the best time for wine tasting is mid-morning, late morning, about 11.
Right.
It's supposed to be where your taste buds are open and ready to taste.
Is that right?
Well,
see, a lot of
yes.
people would stare at you opening a bottle at 11 a.m. and think,
It's a bit awkward in the office.
I would
It's a
never
bit early for you.
never
It's a bit early for you on a weekend, isn't it? Peter?
Okay, I have to correct. I was talking about
I think you'll find in
tasting.
marketing it's standard procedure.
When you have a
I was
Lamborghini
talking
at
about
11,
tasting, not drinking.
Oh, yeah, but if you've opened it, you taste, and
you
then
don't- of course.
it's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It would be a
You're
waste. Well, unless you have to taste several hundred of wine in the same in a short period of time, then you don't. Is there one thing that you could?
To me, it's quite light. It's quite light.
It is quite light.
It's quite
Well,
light. It's,
it is. I mean, in the range of wines, the Pinot Noir is not necessarily the heaviest wine, of course, compared to Bordeaux, compared to an Australian Shiraz, for example, which will be extremely powerful. I mean, you'll first see it in the color because it will be much more dark. It's darker. I mean, you can see what's important is more. You have to kind of see through it because it's not. Pinot Noir is not a very dark wine. In terms of the kind of you get when you smell it, you get obviously the fruit flavors, and they are the kind of classic red fruits that you find. You start smelling a bit something which will be more earthy or animal in it. And again, I'm not going to go into the details of what you should smell, but it's a kind of style of aromas that you would get. And these come from mostly the élevage in the wood, the wood barrel. That's what's going to give partially, but it takes a bit of time as well for them to reveal. When in a young wine, you really have the fruit, where a much older wine, you'll have those what we call tertiary aromas, which would be earth, mushroom, undergrowth, and then the animal side, a leather and this type of thing that you will smell.
How
and
much
taste.
of the flavour and the aroma comes from the barrels?
It depends how long
obviously-
it's been in the barrel.
Yeah, because that's key to whiskey, isn't it? It's all
It is
about
very
the barrel.
important, but it is also very important to wine. Now it's all, and that's the winemaker decision and technique, and how he wants his wine, what profile he wants to give to his wine. How do the winemaker would decide to take these grapes and make them in a stillless tank, because he doesn't want wood, but otherwise do you want wood? And when you want wooden barrel, do you want new oak, which should give a lot of flavors to the wine, and then otherwise you could use oak, but you could use a 2, 3, 4-year-old oak, so that has seen 2, 3, 4 vintages, and then the impact of the wood in terms of aromas to the wine would be very minimal. The reason they would use it, again, is the micro-oxygenation you get through the woods, which don't get through that. But how long and what type of wood you use.
And a wine producer wouldn't use barrels that, for example, have come from Spain and had sherry, and
It's the other way around.
Okay.
So wine barrels are then used for spirits. Very important, and I'm sure that you had that conversation with Jonny.
Mostly sherry, wasn't it?
About sherry is one of the wine that they really look after, they really want. I think the issue with the whiskies industry now is that because there's less and less sherry produced, there's less and less used barrels of sherry. But at home I have some couple of bottles of whiskey that were aged in Sauternes. And the other one is Montbazillac, which is another sweet wine from the southwest of France. So they used all various types of used wine barrels for whiskies, but the other way around is not, it doesn't work. The question for a winemaker would be, do I use new oak? First question. New oak would give more aromas to wine than used oak. Do I use, I think it's usually French, Spanish or American oak, because they have very different profiles. I think in Spain, most of the wine, a lot of wineries, they use American oak, which is going to give a lot of vanilla and almost caramel profile to wine, when in France they use French barrels, which gives different profile. It's even the oak that you use is very very unique.
English oak. Sussex oak. I think it's the finest in the world, Sussex oak.
Taste of mould.
It's the name of my local pub, the Sussex oak.
But it's very much, it's all the small details that will make a wine in the end. And from how you run your culture in your vineyard, how you run your winery, what material you will use to make the wine, how you will make it, everything. It's the conjunction of all these very small, or not small, but all these parts which would make the wine in the end. And for the hospice de Beaune, what's also interesting is everyone buys the same wine at the same time, but then they all go to different producers or négociants to finish the élevage, and they could be slightly different in the end. When we had our dinner, we had a client dinner in Beaune last November, and it was very fun to have the same vintage of the same wine, but from that the élevage was done to different places, and they were slightly different in the end. One had seen, you could taste that one had seen a little bit longer the oak barrel, the other one maybe shorter, because after they've been moved from the hospice winery to the négociant could say, well, I would recommend to move it from the new barrel that we have to a second or third year barrel, just to minimize the impact of the wood, for example. So you can have it's the same wine at the start, but then 5 years later, or it was 8 years, it was 2015, they taste different.
Well,
you had the same wine at the start, and then 5 seconds later...
I'm not the only one that's...
It's gone.
Yeah.
Oh, do you think it's time for me to
I think
pour
we're
another glass?
tasting and you're just drinking.
Well, oh, look, I'm getting another one.
I don't think you had really a proper taste.
Yeah, I think you're right. I had less than the others.
We can tell you work in marketing.
Hey, had this for breakfast.
I'm okay, thanks.
Celian, thank you ever so. This is a good time to wrap it up because I can now
Enjoy it.
I can now enjoy. I can say cheers. Thank you for joining us.
Well,
Thank you
very
for
much for
imparting
having
all your
me.
knowledge.
It's a real pleasure.
And it's been fun. And yeah, thank
About
you
to
very
get
much.
more fun.
He's going to have to take that back to the office.
Nah,
he's going to have to
yet.
take it back. No,
Well,
no,
I still,
it's all
I
going to
still
go wrong.
need to go around and watch the car. So I'm not going to take the bottle with me going to
True.
the car. So
Right, well, cheers to that then. And thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of I'm Sotheby's Wine Show this time round. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. See you next time.